the one who breaks the darkness with a liberating light. Praise the one who frees the prisoners, turning blindness into sight.
Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. After reading yesterday in Ezra chapter 5 of the letter Tattenai wrote to King Darius, today's chapter 6, we get the king's response. Then Darius, the king, made a decree, and search was made in Babylonia, in the house of the archives where the documents were stored, and in Ecbatana, the citadel that is in the province of Media, a scroll was found on which was written a record. In the first year of Cyrus the king issued a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be rebuilt, the place where sacrifices were offered, and let its foundations be retained. Its height shall be 60 cubits, and its breadth 60 cubits, with 3 layers of great stones and 1 layer of timber. Let the cost be paid from the royal treasury, and also let the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that is in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, be restored and brought back to the temple that is in Jerusalem, each to its place. You shall put them in the house of God. Now therefore, Tattenai, governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-bozenai, and your associates, the governors who are in the province beyond the river, keep away. Let the work on this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding what you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the rebuilding of this house of God. The cost is to be paid to these men in full and without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river, and whatever is needed, bulls, rams, or sheep for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, or oil, as the priests at Jerusalem require. Let that be given to them day by day without fail, that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also I make a decree that if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dunghill. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who shall put out a hand to alter this, or to destroy this house of God that is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, make a decree. Let it be done with all diligence. Then, according to the word sent by Darius the king, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-bozenai, and their associates did with all diligence what Darius the king had ordered. And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They finished their building by decree of the God of Israel, and by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. And the people of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the returned exiles, celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their divisions for the service of God at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. On the 14th day of the 1st month, the returned exiles kept the Passover, for the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were clean. So they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the returned exiles, for their fellow priests, and for themselves. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated himself from the uncleanness of the peoples of the land to worship Yahweh, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for Yahweh had made them joyful, and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, so that he aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. This is the word of the Lord. So as Tattenai had requested in our previous chapter, Darius makes a decree, searches the royal records for anything Cyrus might have said in regards to this house of God in Jerusalem, and they find it. They find it in Media, which Media is going to be quite a distance away. I'm trying to see if I've got a good map of the Middle East that gives me a key for distance. But if I'm struggling to find that right now, what you're going to be looking for is on a map today, the Caspian Sea. So as you're looking at a picture that's normally Israel, that region, and the Jordan River's in the picture, and the Mediterranean Sea is on your left in that shot. You have to travel quite a ways to the east in order to get yourself to Media. You're going to travel through, well, you're going to travel through several different locations, including Assyria. So you're going to go through Syria, Mesopotamia, Chaldea, Assyria, and eventually you finally get to Media by the Caspian Mountains, just south of the Caspian Sea. So hundreds of miles, perhaps. This is an expansive kingdom at this point in history. This kingdom of Persia, which is going to fall not to Babylon. They conquered Babylon, which will fall to Alexander the Great and the Greek. What do they call that? The Greek Empire wasn't called Macedonian Empire, maybe. Well, Alexander's empire, that part of history. So as we look at this, we get the response here, and we see in verse 4 that it's to be paid. Cyrus' decree is that it's to be paid from the royal treasury. So Cyrus is going to pay for this to be done. The foundations are to remain the same, verse 3, so it's 60 cubits by 60 cubits. A cubit is roughly the measurement from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger, and again, roughly 18 inches. So as you read this, that's 90 by 90 feet. A 90-foot tall structure. That's significant height for that point in history as well. That's a significant height for this point in history. Anyway, verse 6, we get Darius's response to Tattenai and the rest. Keep away. Let them rebuild. And then verse 8, moreover, Darius adds his own decree on top of Cyrus's decree, and that is that Tattenai and all those other leaders across the beyond the river, so on the west side of the Jordan, are to pay for it. How is it to be paid for? Out of the collection, the tribute of the province. So as they collected money that would be normally sent off to the king, instead of sending that money off to the king, use it to rebuild this temple. So Tattenai at first doesn't want this thing built. Now he not only ends up seeing it built, he's going to help it be built by funding it, and also by funding the things that would happen in the house, the sacrifices that the priests would end up making. We read that in verse 9 as well. Day by day without fail, and Darius doesn't say for how long. That's an interesting thing for his decree to leave out. I mean, it almost makes it sound like then it would last ongoingly, permanently. Now, why? Why would Darius do this? Well, first there is the honor of previous kings. If you wish to keep that respect among your people for yourself, then you're going to honor the kings that had come before you as well. So if you dishonor them, then it encourages the people to not listen to your decrees. So he's going to keep Cyrus's decree. But why go the extra length here? He reveals it himself in verse 10. Pray for the life of the king and his sons. Again, it's a polytheistic worldview of most of this time in history. Darius is just asking for another god to be on his side. The more the merrier, the better off he's going to be. That's kind of the way he's looking at this. And so he's encouraging this to happen for multiple reasons, and we see a couple of different reasons given here. And then he also adds curses to this. The death penalty for anyone that fights against it, in quite a harsh way, being impaled in his own house. And then also in verse 12, Darius is trying to give God direction, that God would punish any who stand against. So not only a worldly death, but Darius pushes us even further, that God would punish those who would seek to destroy his house. So this is bold and strong and solid of a decree from Darius. And in verse 13, we read Tatnai and all the others, they do it with diligence. They follow the order, the edict of their king. Verse 14, it's built, it's prospered through the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah that we'd read about in the previous chapter. They they did the work, they trusted, and they were encouraged because the prophets of God were with them. And so we see this happening. And we read that it is by decree of God and by Cyrus and by Darius, and then Artaxerxes gets thrown into here as well, even though Artaxerxes has not reigned yet at this point. So maybe that, just as chapter 4 had a little bit of a confusing timeline to it, perhaps this is also referring to the idea that in the future, that even under Artaxerxes, um, things will be going in the direction of rebuilding again. Even though Artaxerxes is going to stop stuff, he's going to start it up again and rebuild, at this point, the rest of the city of Jerusalem. So we're going to come to that perhaps tomorrow as we get to chapter 7, and we finally get to the for Ezra, the writer, his modern day. So he's been doing history, a recap so far. But in chapter 7, we're introduced to Ezra and his time frame. So we'll get into that tomorrow. We read in 15 that it was finished in the 6th year of the reign of Darius, on the 3rd day of the month of Adar. The Lutheran Study Bible points out that this would be, for an equivalent to us, February 21st, and it's the year 516 BC. So roughly 70 years after Judah and the temple had been destroyed, the temple is finished and dedicated by the Jews. The returning exiles, as we see in 16, they celebrate, they dedicate the house. That dedication thing is something you can talk about if you'd like to, and you can even talk to your pastor about this too. Frequently, when we set things apart, when we set them aside for use within the church, within the house of God, we do have a rite of dedication of some kind, and we've got specific rites for lots of different things. But it's not just the things that would happen in the church. So if you get a new organ, for example, something like that, or if you've just built a new congregation, a new facility, that's another. But it's not just things in the church. These rites of dedication can also be things that happen for your family. And your pastor, if you would like him to, when you have a new home built or when you've just moved into a new home, he can come and speak a blessing upon your house. Or if you're giving a Bible to your child for the very first time, your pastor can dedicate that for them as well. So those are conversations you might want to have with them to see if you can make it even more sacred, set apart, holy, the things that will be used for the Lord's purposes in your life and in your family. We read the offering is there, a sin offering done for all of Israel. Things are returning in many ways back to the way that they had been. They're going back to the sacrifices of the Old Testament that they were supposed to do. We saw that a couple of chapters ago. They were doing the festivals again after they rebuilt the altar. Chapter 3, I think that was. And now, verse 19, now we go back to the big celebration. The Passover feast is kept again. You can read about that one in Exodus chapter 12. They're doing it at the right time, too. 14th day of the first month. This was the reorientation of the calendar around God instead of around worldly events. They join in the celebration of the Passover feast. So they were not only those who had returned from exile, but also those who had abandoned false gods and joined themselves to the house of Israel, to Yahweh. Those who were sojourners or who were perhaps had been in Babylon and went with the Jews because they had come to believe in Yahweh themselves. So this idea that faith, that salvation reaches outside of just the Jews, again, seen here. It's seen so frequently in the Old Testament. And this is just another example of that. Now, here's a fun conversation you can have with your children. You can talk about the 7-day duration of the Passover celebration. Imagine a 7-day feast. Think of your Thanksgiving family celebration or your Christmas family celebration. One of those big ones where you get together with lots of people and there's lots of good food. Think of something like that and imagine it lasting for 7 days. I think I'd have to have family exercise time in there or something. But just the celebration, that's what the Passover was, an a annual week-long feast, remembering what God had done for his people. Now, if that sounds great, how about a feast that lasts forever? Because the Passover of the Old Testament points us forward to the cross of Christ. It points us forward to the Lord's Supper that he celebrated that very day, as a Hebrew would count a day. Thursday night and Friday morning are the same day, even though we think of them as different. The Lord's Supper that he celebrates with the disciples is the new Passover feast. But even that is still pointing us forward. We partake of Christ's body and blood now for the forgiveness of sins, in hopes that one day we will partake of them together again. The heavenly banquet, the feast in paradise that not only lasts a day or a week, it lasts forever. So you can talk about that together. You can talk about what you look forward to about paradise, about being with God. Those could be interesting and enlightening conversations to see what your kids are thinking, or see what your spouse is thinking that paradise is going to be like someday. It could be good. And then, continue those conversations as you come into the church. Talk about them with your pastor, or bring them up in Bible class sometime, and see how, you can derail your pastor's Bible study and see where the conversation might go. Those could be good conversations to have. All right. So we see that the work is completed. Passover is celebrated. The people are joyous because even the heart of the king of Assyria has turned in their favor, and he helped them rebuild. Tomorrow again we leap forward in time and we meet Ezra.
Let us praise the Word incarnate, Christ who suffered in our place. Jesus died and rose victorious, that we may know God by grace. Let us sing